We often grow up internalizing this unspoken rule that family is untouchable, that no matter what they say to you, what they do to you, how they make you feel, you're supposed to take it. You're supposed to tolerate it because they're your blood, because they mean well, because that's just how they are. But let's look at that carefully. Let's look at it not with the eyes of a frightened child trying to keep the peace at the dinner table, but with the clarity of a conscious, thinking adult who values their own dignity. A respect is not a luxury. It's not some bonus you get when someone's in a good mood. It's not a gift given only to people who've earned it in some particular way. It is a fundamental requirement for any relationship to be psychologically sustainable. That includes romantic relationships, friendships, work environments, and yes, family, especially family, because that's where your first blueprint for love, trust, and identity is formed. And if the foundational environment is chaotic, manipulative, dismissive, or abusive, it doesn't just hurt you in the moment, it warps your expectations of how you should be treated for years to come. A lot of people will say, but that's your mom or that's your brother. You can't just cut them off. Well, what exactly is the principle here? Is the principle that biology grants someone the right to mistreat you indefinitely? That shared DNA entitles them to your silence and compliance? Because if that's the case, then what we're really saying is your autonomy is secondary to their comfort, that your emotional well-being is negotiable, but their role in your life is not. And that is a profoundly... Now, I'm not talking about petty disagreements or imperfect communication. Everyone gets emotional, everyone gets it wrong. Sometimes. I'm talking about patterns of disrespect, chronic invalidation, passive aggression disguised as humor, guilt-tripping, gaslighting, the kind of behavior that over time chips away at your sense of reality and self-worth. And if you've experienced it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The insidious part is that many families condition you to doubt your instincts. If you speak up, you're overreacting. If you set a boundary, you're being selfish. If you express pain, you're too sensitive. And what happens then? You start to gaslight yourself. You begin to believe that enduring disrespect is noble, that minimizing your pain is maturity, that keeping the peace, no matter the cost, is your moral duty. But it's not. Peace without dignity is not peace. It's silent war. Respect must be mutual to be real. It cannot exist one way. You cannot continue to honor someone who consistently dishonors you without it destroying you from the inside out. And the longer you tolerate it, the more you reinforce the lie that it's acceptable, that it's normal. And in doing so, you become a participant in your own erosion. You want to know what's more loving than blind loyalty? Honesty, clarity, accountability, saying, I love you, but I will not let you treat me this way anymore. That is a hard thing to say, but it is also one of the most liberating things a human being can do because it affirms your worth, not just in theory, but in practice. Too often people confuse tolerance with virtue. But tolerating the intolerable is not a virtue, it's a form of self-betrayal. And the more you betray yourself in the name of keeping the family together, the more fragmented you become. You start to lose track of your values, your needs, your voice. You become small in your own life. And no relationship, no matter how sacred its origin, is worth that cost. There's a difference between forgiveness and access. You can forgive someone and still choose to love them from a distance. You can recognize their humanity without handing them the power to harm yours. You can wish them healing while protecting your own. And this isn't bitterness, this isn't coldness, this is clarity, this is strength. Let me put it plainly. If a stranger spoke to you the way some of your relatives do, you would not question the need to create distance. You wouldn't hesitate to demand respect, but because it's family, you hesitate. Because you've been told that protecting yourself from them is betrayal. But it's not, it's integrity. Because who you allow into your inner world teaches your mind and soul what you believe you're worthy of. And if you keep the doors open to disrespect, you teach yourself that your boundaries don't matter. And over time, you forget how to build them at all. It's not really love, it's control, it's tradition, it's performance, but it's not love. And when you finally see that clearly, when you stop excusing, stop rationalizing, and stop enabling, you begin to reclaim your power, not through revenge, not through hostility, but through presence, through quiet, unwavering conviction that says, I will be treated with dignity, so no, don't tolerate it from anyone, not even family, especially not family, because if love doesn't include respect, then or not at all. That single decision might just save your life, or at the very least return it to you. People often confuse kindness with, they think being a good son or a loyal daughter means saying yes when they want to say no, absorbing discomfort to avoid, and allowing others, especially family, to overstep again and again in the name of love or tradition. But here's the truth, without boundaries, there is no relationship, only obligation. And obligation without choice is the seedbed of resentment. Boundaries are not about rejection, they're about self respect. They are not walls meant to punish people, they are gates that let love in and keep chaos out. And if you've grown up in an environment where your boundaries were not honored, or worse, were actively punished, you might struggle to even recognize where you end and someone else begins. That's not just a behavioral issue, that's psychological trauma. It distorts your internal compass. It teaches you to prioritize the emotional needs of others over your own reality. And when that pattern becomes ingrained, you start tolerating things that are harmful, passive aggressive remarks, manipulative guilt trips, controlling behavior, all because confronting it feels too dangerous or too exhausting. But here's the psychological cost. Every time you silence yourself to maintain peace, you sacrifice a little piece of your identity. You trade truth for approval. You start shaping your personality to fit other people's expectations, not because it's who you are, but because it feels safer. This happens slowly, almost invisibly. You find yourself editing your thoughts before you speak. You walk on eggshells around certain people, predicting their reactions before you even open your mouth. And eventually you lose clarity about what you actually think or feel. That's not harmony, that's self-abandonment. And it doesn't matter how noble your intentions are. If you repeatedly allow others to violate your boundaries, you're teaching them that your well-being is negotiable. And they will take you at your word. People will treat you the way you allow them to. And if you don't draw the line, they'll never see it. You see this all the time in families. A parent criticizes an adult child under the guise of just being honest. A sibling uses emotional blackmail to get their way. An uncle or aunt crosses the line with intrusive questions or unsolicited advice. And the excuse is always the same, it's family, it's not that serious. But it is serious, because the moment you begin tolerating repeated disrespect, you send a message not just to them, but to yourself, that your discomfort is acceptable, that your voice doesn't matter. The philosophical reality here is that autonomy is the foundation of psychological health. You are not a moral person because you let people walk over you. You are moral when you act with courage, clarity, and integrity, even when it's uncomfortable. That includes saying, I will not have this conversation if you raise your voice, or I'm not comfortable with how you're speaking to me, or this topic is off limits. And if that leads to tension, so be it. The discomfort of conflict is the price of freedom. It is not cruelty, it is not rebellion, it is truth in motion. Now, some people won't like that. Some people benefit from your lack of boundaries. They like the version of you who doesn't speak up. Who goes along, who absorbs the tension. When you start changing that dynamic, you're disrupting their power. They may accuse you of being selfish, ungrateful, cold. But remember this, people who genuinely love you want you to feel safe around them. They want clarity. They want mutual respect. And if someone resents your boundaries, they were never seeking a relationship. They were seeking control. And what's crucial here is the consistency. A boundary isn't a one-time declaration. It's a commitment to show up differently every time, not with aggression, not with drama, but with calm, firm self-respect. That's how you rewire the relational dynamic. That's how you teach people what's acceptable in your presence And I'll tell you something else, it's not always easy. In fact, it rarely is, especially with family. Especially when the script has been written a long time ago, you may feel guilty, you may second guess yourself, you may even lose a few relationships, but what you gain is far more valuable: clarity, peace, emotional sovereignty. You stop performing for people who refuse to meet you where you are, and you start cultivating connections based on authenticity, not obligation. So let me ask you this: what would happen if for once you chose discomfort over dishonesty? If you honored your own internal signals instead of minimizing them for someone else's comfort? What would it look like to protect your energy like it actually mattered? Because it does matter. You matter. And anyone who truly loves you will rise to meet the standard of respect you set, not out of fear, but out of care. Boundaries are not barriers to love. They are the conditions in which real love becomes possible. And if someone cannot meet you there, even if they share your blood, then the distance you create isn't cruelty, it's clarity. One of the most difficult things a person can do, especially in the context of family, is to step back and reevaluate the roles they've inherited. And I use that word very deliberately, inherited, because in many families your place isn't chosen, it's assigned. Maybe you were the caretaker, maybe you were the scapegoat, maybe you were the peacekeeper, the strong one, the quiet one, the one who never needed anything, and somewhere along the way you stopped being seen for who you actually are and became merely a function within the family system, a role you didn't sign up for, but learned to perform in order to survive. Now, the problem is that these roles become invisible cages. They're not just social expectations. They're psychological scripts. They tell you who you're allowed to be, what you're allowed to feel, which truths are acceptable and which must be buried. And we follow them, often unconsciously, because breaking them feels like betraying the entire emotional economy of the family. It feels dangerous, because on some level it is. Why? Because the family system is home to some of the most deeply entrenched patterns you'll ever face. These patterns have been reinforced not just through behavior but through silence, through decades of subtle cues, through rules that were never spoken but always understood. Don't talk about what's really going on. Don't challenge your elders. Don't rock the boat. Be who we need you to be, not who you are. And most people obey these rules not out of cowardice, but out of conditioning. There's often a deep, almost primal fear of what will happen if you step outside the role. Will you be rejected, attacked, frozen out, dismissed, made the villain? In many cases, yes. And so we play along, long past the point where the game is costing us our sanity. But at a certain point, and this is where maturity begins, you have to ask, what am I sacrificing in order to maintain this role? And the answer often is your authenticity, your agency, your right to evolve is something rarely acknowledged. Just because someone has known you your whole life doesn't mean they know who you are today. People change, people grow, and yet families often struggle to accommodate that growth, especially when it challenges the old hierarchy. So the son who starts asserting boundaries is suddenly disrespectful. The daughter who no longer wants to be the emotional dumping ground is cold. The sibling who moves away emotionally or physically is selfish. These labels aren't reflections of truth. They're defenses. They protect the system from change. But if the system is dysfunctional, if it operates on unspoken fear, guilt, or control, then it should be disrupted. And that disruption often begins with a single person who's willing to say, "This stops with me." That's not arrogance, that's responsibility, that's generational courage. Because let's be honest, trauma doesn't just appear out of nowhere, it gets passed down. And unless someone actively chooses to confront it, it keeps moving forward, quietly shaping the emotional landscape of future generations. So reevaluating your family roles isn't about blame, it's about clarity. It's about stepping outside the inherited narrative and asking, does this story still serve me? Is this the kind of relationship I want to model for my children, for my future self? And if the answer is no, then the next step becomes non-negotiable: change the story. And that may require redefining the relationship, not necessarily cutting people off, but transforming the dynamics, refusing to play the role, refusing to pretend. Now, that's not easy. It often requires grieving the family you wanted in order to deal honestly with the family you have. That grief is real, but it's also clarifying. Because once you stop trying to fix or manage everyone around you, you begin to reclaim energy. You begin to create space, not just for new relationships, but for a new version of yourself. One that isn't trapped in an outdated narrative, one that doesn't confuse self abandonment with loyalty. People often ask, but if I change and they don't, then what? Then you learn to live with that tension. You learn to protect your peace, even if others remain in denial. You stop seeking validation from people who only approve of you when you're small. And that takes courage. But that's what growth demands, because here's the deeper philosophical truth: roles are static. But the human spirit is not. It longs to evolve, to transcend, to become. And if your family can't make space for that evolution, then you have to create it, even if it means doing so alone, even if it means being misunderstood, because living in truth is worth the misunderstanding, living in integrity is worth the distance. So, if there's a part of you that's been waiting for permission to step outside the role, to stop performing, to stop pleasing, to start being, let this be it. Now, you don't owe anyone a version of yourself that no longer exists. There's a powerful shift that happens when a person finally decides to choose peace over guilt. I don't mean superficial peace, the kind that looks calm on the outside but is built on silence, appeasement, and emotional expression. I mean real peace, the kind that comes from alignment, from living in truth, from no longer twisting yourself into a version that keeps everyone else comfortable while you quietly suffocate. Guilt is one of the most effective tools of emotional control, and it's particularly potent when wielded by family. Why? Because guilt operates at the level of identity. It doesn't just say, you did something wrong. It says you are wrong for having needs, for speaking up, for pulling away. And because family is tied so deeply to our sense of self, we absorb that guilt with little resistance. We internalize it, we make it mean something about our character. And as a result, we stay stuck in dynamics that no longer serve us, out of fear that stepping away means we're the bad guy. But let's think critically about that. Is it truly wrong to remove yourself from a relationship that is emotionally draining, even if that person shares your last name? Is it wrong to say, I will not continue to play this role, absorb this dysfunction, or pretend everything is fine simply because doing so might make someone else uncomfortable? No, it's not wrong, it's necessary, because when the cost of harmony is your self-respect, you're not in a relationship, you're in a hostage situation. Now, the guilt doesn't just appear randomly, it's been cultivated. It's been reinforced sometimes for decades through language, behavior, and subtle cultural messaging. You're too sensitive. After all we've done for you, you've changed. Statements like these are designed to provoke an emotional debt. They aim to make your evolution seem like betrayal, but that is not love speaking. That is control masquerading as care. Real love welcomes your growth, even if it challenges the old dynamic. Real love wants you to be whole, not obedient. If someone only accepts you when you're agreeable, passive, or dependent on their approval, then what they value isn't you, it's the version of you they can manage. That's not respect, that's convenience. And guilt is the emotional glue that holds that illusion together. So, what do? We unlearn the guilt, and unlearning doesn't mean becoming cold or detached, it means becoming grounded. It means noticing when that old inner voice rises up, the one that says you're selfish for setting a boundary, or they'll be disappointed if you say no, and meeting it with reason, not automatic, because emotional maturity means distinguishing between guilt that signals actual wrongdoing and guilt that's been conditioned to keep you small. A lot of people, when they start setting boundaries with family, I describe this heavy fog of shame and anxiety. And that's not because they're doing something wrong. It's because they're disrupting a long-standing narrative. They're no longer playing their part in the emotional contract, and that's scary. But if you stay in that fear, if you let it dictate your decisions, you never break the cycle. You just pass it forward to your kids, to your partner, to your inner self. Choosing peace over guilt requires that you accept one very difficult truth: not everyone will understand you. Some people will misinterpret your distance as cruelty. They'll say you've changed, and they'll be right. You have changed. You've grown into someone who refuses to live in emotional debt, someone who values internal clarity more than external approval. And that, to someone who's invested in the old version of you, can feel like a threat. But here's the liberating part: their misunderstanding is not your burden to carry. You are not responsible for how others react to your boundaries when those boundaries are rooted in truth, in necessity, and in self-respect. You don't have to make them agree. You don't need their blessing. You just need your own permission. And yes, you might lose people. That's the reality. But the people you lose when you begin to honor yourself are never the ones who were capable of loving you unconditionally to begin with. And what you gain in return is worth every ounce of discomfort: peace that isn't performative, relationships that are mutual, a sense of self that doesn't vanish every time someone disapproves. Peace, real peace, is not quite compliance, it's inner congruence. It's being able to look in the mirror and say, I didn't betray myself today. That's not selfish. That's sacred. That's what allows you to live, not as a fragmented version of yourself, but as a full human being. Whole, honest, free. So here's the final question I'll leave you with, something only you can answer honestly, Pradil. What if you stopped living to avoid guilt and started living to protect your peace?